afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you all to the International Conference on Equitable Education, or for Education. My name is Rapkwan Thamapornpilat from UNICEF Thailand, and I'm very pleased to be your moderator for this session, Innovative Financing for Equitable Education. And in this session, we have three distinguished speakers who will guide us through the groundbreaking innovative financing model and how it applies to education sector. So we have Ms. Arushi Terway from NORAC, Australia, Ms. Hemi Lee from Pan Impact Korea, and also Ms. Sovereign Chuanprapan from UNESCO Bangkok. One of the Sustainable Development Goals in education is that all member states would encourage every children to complete primary and secondary education by 2030. When we look back in the Millennium Development Goals era between 2000 to 2015, you can see that the world have made a lot of progress in reducing the number of out-of-school children. In 2000, we have about 99 million out-of-school children of primary age, and that number reduced to 59 million in 2015. However, you will see the slowing down trend after that. Between 2015 to 2018, the figure remained almost the same at 59 million out-of-school children. That implies that reaching the most marginalized group is even more difficult and even more expensive. And with this economic downturn and also the global pandemic of COVID-19, the aid allocation to education sector could even be reduced. And that leads to the idea of having an innovative way or a fresh idea to financing education. The Q&A session will begin after a discussion has finished, and I would encourage all the online participants to leave their question in the Q&A chat box on the conference website. So without further ado, I would like to ask the first speaker, Ms. Arushi Terway from NORAC, to give her presentation. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be presenting on our experience with research on innovative financing for education. I will try to focus a bit more on how there's some potential for innovative financing to help us improve both equity and inclusion within the education sector. I'm a senior lead research associate at NORAC, which is a think tank based in Geneva. And we focus on a lot of different global education issues, including education financing and private sector engagement in education. So within our innovative financing work, our aim is really to improve capacity and deepen the collective knowledge on innovative financing. There are lots and lots of models being tried, especially in the last 5 years, but we have very little experience both in how to design and structure these models and where they are most useful and which problems they can potentially solve within education. So the aim at NORAG is to be doing the research on this experience and also build the capacity of education sector professionals and finance sector professionals in understanding the challenges with innovative financing in education. So the way we look at innovative financing is within the definition that has two dimensions. One is mechanisms that are capable of raising additional funds within education, either from new sources of money that are not being used in education as yet, or improving the amount of money that is coming from existing sources of education. So whether it be international aid or even domestic financing. That's one dimension of improving the amount of money, as in increasing the size of the pie that is available to education. The second aspect is actually improving the way that the money is used, whether it's the new money coming in or the existing money. So using the funds that are already there in better ways to improve results. So we'd look at this two-dimension approach at innovative financing, which actually broadens our thinking of what can be included as innovative finance. Often, many people think of innovative finance as only mechanisms that raise market from the private capital market. But we try to look at even mechanisms where it's about improving the traditional financing, like results-based financing that a lot of the traditional aid organizations are trying out. So why are we even talking about innovative financing? Since 2000, or to an extent even in 1990 when the first commitment was made for education for all, constantly there's a debate about the lack of funding to reach the global commitments that have been made to education. Funds lack both on bilateral, multilateral donor side, but they also lack in domestic education budgets as well. The aims are very high, but we don't have enough money to reach those goals. And on the international aid side, the money has actually fluctuated a lot too. Since 2012, the aid that's coming to education has pretty much stagnated to about $12 billion, whereas it's been increasing for infrastructure, for health, and several other sectors. So there's something going on with education there. The transaction cost for traditional aid is also thought of to be very high. Paris Declaration commitments have improved this, but there's still room for further improvement on how we are using the money. On the domestic education side, countries have made the commitment to increase their domestic budget to education as a percentage of their entire domestic budget to about 15 to 20%. But in 2016, the global average was still only at 14.6. So even there, we are not meeting the commitments that we want to. And then majority of the money that goes into education ends up going for recurrent costs, especially remuneration for teacher salaries and other staff salaries. So very little is left for innovation, especially for reaching the excluded population, the hardest to reach population, because they often require a lot more money than it would be required for the children that are easy to reach. And then in the last 10 years or so, there's also a recognition, and this is for development as a whole, not just education, that there's a mismatch between the amount of funding that's put in and the results we are getting. All the funding is not going or being used in the most efficient manner to get effectiveness within the education sector. So this is the backdrop of why we started looking at innovative financing itself. The commitment kind of came from to explore innovative financing. Commitment came from the Monterey Consensus back in early 2000s, where there was a recognition that any country that has a good plan to reach development goals, especially education goals, should not be lacking the funds. Donors should be coming together. The whole world should be coming together to make sure they have the finances to do it. So the idea was always that additional funds need to come in that are complementary to existing traditional financing for education. Another idea that started popping up along with that was to attract market-based capital or market-based approaches to financing education. This had the potential to leverage a lot of the money that was sitting in private capital market that was not being used for social development, but also to encourage innovation, because it's considered that private sector practices allow for more innovative approaches to solve problems. And to an extent, it was potentially meant to be more stable and predictable than traditional aid, which have cycles of 1 year at a time, with donor countries deciding appropriations every year. And overall, this was supposed to improve the quality of existing aid and of new aid, and improve collaboration between public and private sector, and shift the focus of program success, the risk of it, to the private sector than to the public sector. So what's happened in education? We recently did a systematic literature review to see what types of mechanisms have been tried in education. I know this slide is extremely dense, but what you need to remember is that when we look at academic and some gray literature on actual experience in trying innovative financing in education, only these mechanisms have been tried. These go from social impact or development impact bonds to income contingent loans or income share agreements, which are student financing mechanisms at higher education level, debt swaps or debt buy downs, which are purely mechanisms that are used by bilateral and multilateral donors, education bonds that have been tried out in education, usually also through multilateral donors. African Development Bank and Inter-American Development Bank have these. Remittances, which are more on private individuals sending their money over and some companies incentivizing that money to be used specifically for education. Impact investment, that is one field that is burgeoning right now. There's a lot of potential to expand this considerably in education. And then even taxation, some interesting approaches to change taxation within countries to increase the amount of money that's going into the domestic education budget. So when we looked at the literature itself, we noticed a clear pattern that while the conversations about a couple of different mechanisms was going on until about 2012, 2013, right before the SDG commitments, this conversation blew up a lot. And there's a lot more literature, especially on attempting to pilot new mechanisms that have happened. And then more recently in 2018 and 2019, some final reports of initial tryouts of some of the mechanisms. So there's a lot more happening in recent years. The other thing we noticed is more and more types of mechanisms are being tried out. Initially, the conversation on innovative financing was really focused on traditional type of financing and creating new modalities and structures on that side. But now it's shifted more towards the engagement of private capital market and private sector as a whole. So literature is actually starting to capture that. So what we are doing at the moment is we are doing several case studies on the experience of innovative financing in different countries. So we have about six in-depth case studies that will be published very soon. But we also have short desk-based case studies that capture the basic essence of what's happening in these models. So some of the lessons learned we have are on the key features of especially the newer mechanisms. Pretty much all of them focus on results. So we are moving away from funding inputs and processes. We're not counting how many schools we're building or how many buses have been provided, how many blackboards have been provided. We're really starting to look at how many schools actually ended up getting built when a provider was incentivized to build them, how many students were actually enrolled and had improved their learning outcomes, things like that. So what it's doing is allowing the service providers to focus on innovating the processes to reach the hardest to reach students. So it's not about dictating how to teach or how to provide education, but more about making sure that the education is actually delivered and there's improvement in learning outcomes. So it's focusing on that and also focusing on cost effectiveness of it. So they're adopting a lot of business practices into the management of the education system itself to improve efficiency within the system and improve effectiveness through the efficiency improvements. As I said, there's a move away from restructuring traditional aid mechanisms and trying out more mechanisms that raise capital from the private market. And then in general, there's higher engagement of the private sector, not just in getting the money from them, but also including them as service providers. So there's a lot more public-private partnership. And this usually involves a combination of financial and social return. A lot of globally with SDG commitments, a lot of private companies are now focusing on improving their investment in something called ESG, environmental, social, and governmental investments. So they do want to actually invest in this area. So they are ready to compromise a little bit on their financial return if the money they're investing is going towards social development programs. So that's one reason that when the public sector is reaching out to the private sector to get more money, private sector is also actually interested in coming over and partnering up with public sector to do social development. So with all of this, theoretically, there's a lot of potential for innovative financing to reach the hardest to reach populations. Because at the end of the day, all the results, whatever result we want to reach, can be incentivized financially in some way or the other. It's not an easy proposition. Parties on all sides, stakeholders who are involved in creating these mechanisms, creating projects, need to be very well aware of negotiations on how to actually incentivize the service providers to really get to the target we want to get to. But it's potentially possible and theoretically possible, and it has been done in several projects. So some of the examples I can give you, the first development impact bond within the education sector, Educate Girls DIB, that was tried out in India, they made their payment schedule so that it was related to the number of girls they were enrolling and actually decreasing the gap in female enrollment, and then also on learning outcomes. So the incentives to the service provider, which was the NGO Educate Girls, was to actually deliver that result. They couldn't just enroll any students or easy to enroll students. They specifically focused on students that were difficult to enroll. Another example is in Nepal, and a similar program has been tried out in Ethiopia as well. And this is focusing on students who have some secondary education, but not enough to enter the employment market. This is unemployment issue. There's results-based financing where the service providers are incentivized a little extra to reach out to the populations that have been targeted as vulnerable. So enrolling female trainees would give them a better rate to train each student than it would to train somebody who already has access to different programs. They've also identified specific vulnerable populations, low-income students and things like that, to do that. Another one where you can be attracting a lot of out-of-school children is a program on social success notes. It's a type of impact loan that's given out to a company, a small-scale company, to install water tanks in schools in Uganda, in super remote schools in Uganda. So that attracts more students to come to that school because they have access to clean water at school. At higher education level, a private student financing company, Lumni, has been trying to give out student loans, or a type of student loan, which is not exactly a loan, it's an equity program, to students who are first-generation university students. They would have had no access to any kind of student financing and no guarantee that they would actually finish university. They're financing those students. So there are lots of examples at the moment of attempting to reach these target groups. And what innovative finance is able to do is incentivize very specific, narrow targets. However, parties on all sides need to be very aware of what that structure is and what the eventual outcome is to be able to create a contract that will actually yield those results. So overall challenges. First of all, it is still a very new field. It's not something we would say we have a lot of experience in and anyone can tell you how to design an innovative financing mechanism. The term innovative finance captures a lot of different things and lots of different types of contractual arrangements. And at the moment, very few institutions have the experience of doing it. You would often see the same institutions pop up in different countries doing the models instead of many different institutions or capacity within each country to actually do it. Along with that, because these are novel approaches and novel structures, the language and definitions and understanding of the mechanisms is not the same. A very simple example is something that we've all been hearing about, impact bonds. If anyone knows what a bond is, would realize very quickly that impact bonds are not exactly traditional bonds. They're something very different. And you have to understand that structure to be able to even consider applying it in a country or for a specific project. In a lot of countries, the legal regulations don't exist to support these structures. A lot of times, different actors and the government have to come up with very creative ways to even make the structures function in that for a very specific pilot project. with all of this, because they're new, the transaction cost for developing anything new is actually very high at the moment. There are now several attempts to try and lower the transaction cost for impact bonds, because that is one area where more and more experience is being accumulated. But we will only find out if it actually happens and the cost is lowered over the next 5 years or so. Another issue is that piloting, because the cost is so high, we often assume that in an innovative financing mechanism where the private sector is involved and we are giving them a financial incentive because they're eventually going to profit from it, they have the appetite to take the risk more than a government entity would be. That's not always proving true. Private financial institutions also have a responsibility to their own share investors. So they're not always as they don't always have as high a risk appetite as we may assume they have. So there's still that question on who takes the risk when it's innovative financing. There's also, related to that, there's maybe an overestimation on how much innovation is allowed. What we have found is in several examples where the service provider who was incentivized only to deliver the results, and therefore the donors or the investors were not supposed to get involved at all in helping them figure out how to get to the results, as in the process and design. And we're supposed to allow the service provider to change the design of the program whenever they needed to ensure that they actually reach the results. That didn't actually happen. If they were not reaching the results, a lot of times everyone, donors and investors, did actually get involved and provided them with a lot of support to figure out how to actually change and improve their processes so they would reach the results. So innovation may not be happening. On the other hand, very few investors would be ready to put their money into something that has never been tried before. They want some kind of a guarantee or some calculation that they will actually get a financial return. So they want the project to be successful. And in that case, they would be more keen on investing in tried and tested methods rather than trying out something completely new. Then on the other side, there is a lot of backlash that engaging with the private sector would create perverse incentives anyway. So there's a lot of skepticism that when a profit motive is introduced within a social sector, we may not be able to reach the hardest to reach, because there will always be some kind of incentive to lower the cost and maximize the profit. So there's high skepticism on one side on this. Engaging international or bilateral donors in an innovative financing mechanism that is of a long period is not always possible either, because they don't always match the financial cycle of the traditional donors. So that may not be always feasible. That's why there are very few social impact bonds tried out in education. Often they are development impact bonds. The difference between the two is in a social impact bond, it's usually some kind of a government that's coming in. But in a development impact bond, often it's a bilateral donor or a philanthropy coming in. So we're still trying to see how well a social impact bond can function within education. And then in general, because these are new, there are very few standards. There's a lack of data because there are not enough examples out there to be able to figure out what standardized data can be collected about them. And in general, we don't have enough research, especially on the impact on equity and social justice for innovative financing mechanisms. So we need more and more examples of this and a lot more research to really start drawing conclusion on when and in which situation innovative financing can be successful. So NORAG, on our side, we are conducting a lot of this research. At the moment, we're conducting case studies to gather the experience with it. Hopefully, in the next coming few years, we will be conducting a few more impact evaluations to assess whether innovative financing is really bringing in additional money into education, and if it's actually improving the efficiency and effectiveness of education programs overall globally, not in individual programs, but globally. So Keep an eye out on our website for more material that is going to come, both for our research and for general information building, capacity building on innovative finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arushitove, for your insightful information and knowledge sharing. Next speaker will be Ms. Hemi Lee from Pan Impact Korea. Please.
Hello, I'm Hemi Lee, a manager of Pan Impact Korea. It's an honor to stand here and share the experience of Seoul SIB with you. Pan Impact Korea is the first SIB intermediary in East Asia. In Korea, we have designed some SIB projects and have supported local governments as the Secretariat of SIB Local Government Council of Korea. End of last year, the first Seoul SIB finished successfully, so I'm pleased to share its results and implications with you. But before we jump into the Seoul SIB, let's talk about the concept of SIB. I heard that the CEO of Pan Impact Korea made a presentation about it last year, so I will talk about it briefly. SIB is a kind of contract. To be specific, if social outcomes are achieved, the government pays back financial return to the private investors who invest money for the project. Before the introduction of SIB, the government used the taxpayer money for project regardless of its result. The problems are that the taxpayer money was used for failed project and social outcomes couldn't be clearly seen. However, SIB is different. The government can manage the budget effectively, and the policy can start to focus on real goal achievement. Traditionally, when the government and service provider cooperate, bilateral relationship between them is formed. In contrast, SIB can start based on multiple relations among participants such as the intermediary working with the government and managing the whole project, investors who gave money for the project, and an evaluator who measures the outcome. When we choose the topic for the first SIB project, we try to find people who are left behind in the blind spot of policy. This was because we wanted to find people who could get help only from SIB. At that time, we got the information of borderline intellectual functioning children, simply called BIF children. Their IQ levels are from 71 to 84, so they are also called slow learners. Their percentage was high in welfare facilities, so we conducted research about them and decided to choose them as the beneficiaries of our project. The Seoul SIB project was for the education of BIF children who are neglected in the blind spot of policy. As for IQ, the children with 85 or more are regarded as normal, and the children with 70 or less are regarded as mentally retarded. To support the mentally retarded, the government provides them with special education and money for living. Then more about BIF children. Since they are not mentally retarded, they cannot get help from anyone. However, their percentage accounts for 13% of people. The the first Seoul SIB is a new try to prove the effectiveness of new education for BIF children. As a result, Pan Impact Korea designed SIB project for BIF children and made a contract with the Seoul government in 2015. This project was started by a service provider in 2016. The target population was about 100 BIF children living in Seoul City child welfare facilities, and the project duration was 3 years. Our goal was to improve the BIF children's intelligence level and their sociality. And we wanted to make the 42% of them meet this goal. Well, on preparation phase, many experts said that it is difficult to improve the intelligence level because the intelligence is inborn. However, sometimes the intelligence cannot be developed because of environmental factors. In this case, if the children are educated properly, their intelligence can be developed. So we gave the IQ test to the children in welfare facilities, and we were so surprised at the result. This was because the percentage of BIF children in welfare facilities was twice higher than the children with common families. These facilities are not for children with low IQ levels, but this means that the intelligence of children in welfare facilities didn't be improved because they grew in poor surroundings with psychological and emotional problems. So service provider offered BIF children with comprehensive intervention program. To enhance the intelligence of BIF children affected by the environmental factor, the service provider gave them the psychotherapy and emotional recovery program and the sociality development program. After that, the program for development of cognitive ability could be provided. So this whole thing was possible because SIB can go on for a long, long time. Then, what happened to the BIF children 3 years later? Well, the maximum performance target was 42%, and the result was that more than the half of the beneficiaries succeeded exceeding our maximum performance target. The intervention program proved its effectiveness. Accordingly, the investor received the principal plus 25% interest. The Seoul government could start the second SIB project with Pentec Korea. And for your information, the second SIB project aims at solving the youth unemployment problem. The first Seoul SIB project gave us several implications. This project improved the qualities of lives of BIF children. This improvement will increase the possibility of their independence. And second, it raised people's understanding and interest in BIF children. Well, related policy for them is expected to be made later. And third, this success proved the effectiveness and rationale of helping BIF children, and also it established the possibility of spreading the policy through social outcomes. And also it can remove the financial burden of the government. And lastly, by showing the model case and contributing to the innovation, the SIB proved its usefulness as a tool. And before wrapping up my presentation, I got some questions about this session. The first question is about innovative financing approach to support out-of-school student education. As I said, SIB can be implemented to support this education. But we started the SIB project with private sector, the government was free from financial burden and spent money after social outcomes were clearly shown. This means that the government reduced the risk of failure, and the other participant could focus on goal achievement, which led to the better social outcome. And the second question is about the main challenges and how to implement SIB. When we introduced SIB to Korea for the first time, persuading government officials was really hard because we had to let them understand the concept and effectiveness of SIB. And after persuading them, we had to lead the Seoul government to make a legislative act because there was no related one, and we had to design the project in a whole new way. And after this whole government announced the first SIB project, we repeatedly persuaded private investors to make them join this new project. Therefore, I believe that it is important to accumulate the experience based on initial model case in order to implement the SIB effectively. And the last question is about the consideration and recommendation to start SIB. The most important things to start SIB are the attention and strong will of the public and private sector. This was because SIB is a new method to solve the social problems. And as you know, it is always difficult to try new things. And currently in Asia, only 2 countries, South Korea and Japan, have activated the SIB project compared to the Western countries who have been running a lot of SIB projects. However, considering the population and social problems in Asia has bigger potential to create new SIB projects. So I hope that government officials and civilian experts listening to this session become more interested in SIB and be motivated to realize it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hemi Lee from Pan Impact Korea. Let's go with the next speaker, Kun Sovirin Chuanprapan from UNESCO Bangkok.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sovirin Chuanprapan from UNESCO Bangkok, and today I'm very pleased to present our initiative called Learning Coin to support education of migrant and out-school children in Thailand. There are more than 400,000 migrant children who have migrated with their parents from Myanmar to Thailand for an economic reason, but only half of these children have access to education. They are out of school due to many factors: financial situation, remote geographical location, or language barriers are one of them. But when we actually ask these children why they are out of school, for example, this girl you can see in the picture, her name is Pio Mama So, and she's a migrant children from Myanmar who is now living in Thailand. Many of them, including her, said they felt guilty of going to school because they rather spend time working to support their families. And that's why we need to find some innovative solution which can motivate them to return to school, enhance their literacy through reading, and at the same time, allowing them to be able to help support their parents with the use of conditional cash transfer. Please allow me to show you a short video on the story of Pio Mama So.
ผมก็อยากเป็นหมอค่ะ หมอที่เก่งค่ะและหนูก็อยากช่วยคนอื่นเขาค่ะแต่มีဖြစ်ချင်တယ်ဆရာဝန်ကအဲ့ဒီကင်ဆာယောဂါကုသနဲ့ခွဲစိတ်ဆရာဝန်တွေဖြစ်မှာဘာလို့ဆိုတော့တမီးအဖိုးတွေအဖွားတွေကအဲ့ဒီယောဂါနဲ့ပဲဆုံးသွားတယ်မှာအဲ့ဒီဆရာဝန်ဖြစ်ချင်တယ်
บางคนก็จะไม่อยากที่จะเรียนต่อเพราะว่าอยากจะช่วยเหลือครอบครัวอยากจะช่วยแบ่งเบาภาระของครอบครัวเนี่ยก็หยุดเรียนไปแต่ว่าเมื่อมีโครงการนี้เกิดขึ้นมีเครื่องมือที่เขารู้สึกว่าได้เรียนด้วยแล้วก็ได้เงินด้วยมันเหมือนกับมันเติมเต็มความต้องการของเขา
คณะผมอยู่มา10 ปีกว่าแล้วหมุนไทยนี่ฟุกไม่ใช่ได้ดันสื่อเพียงไม่ได้ลูกทำได้ขนาดนี้ผมก็สบายใจมากเลยครับ
သူတို့အဖွဲ့အစည်းရတယ်ကောင်းပြီးတော့စာအုပ်တွေကလည်းအမျိုးညားတယ်ပညာရေးဟိုတာဘ ഹു တုတရအောင်မကောက်ဟိုတာပတ်စံလေးရတယ်ဆိုတော့ဖတ်ချင်ကြတယ်မှာပြီးတော့
อนาคตของลูกผมนี่พูดง่ายๆก็ผมก็ไม่อยากให้มุนกับผมอยากให้นั่งห้องแอร์แหละ
As you can see from the video, we started the pilot of this project with my grandchildren in 2018. And in this year, with support of the Equitable Education Fund or EEF, we are scaling up this project in another 4 provinces in Thailand. During the pilot with my grandchildren, our goal was to increase the motivation of these children to stay in school. And this is our concept. We encourage 150 migrant students to return to school and started to read books from our application called LearnBig, which is the open digital library with over 1,000 books. After they read the books from the app, their reading data, such as the number of books they read, number of pages, and how consistently they read, will be recorded in our online monitoring system, which can be accessed by teachers. Teachers can monitor each of their students' reading progress on a daily basis. They can provide extra support to the students who are behind. At the end of each month, the system calculates the incentives for each student based on their reading progress, and we provide cash as a scholarship for their parents based on their children's monthly reading achievements in order to leverage their quality of life. The pilot was conducted with 150 migrant children with the support of POSCO 1% Foundation, Republic of Korea. We worked with Foundation for Rural Youth to provide the tablets preloaded with LearnBig application, and through cooperation, the telecommunication service provider in Thailand also provided the internet for all students. LearnBig application was developed by UNESCO Bangkok with an aim to provide free educational resources for our school children. The app is available for free download, as well as the website, which offers textbooks recognized by the Ministries of Education, Thailand and Myanmar, storybooks in Thai, Myanmar, and Malay languages, as well as teaching materials. Now let's take a look at how we calculate the incentives for the children. There are 3 reading index. The first and the most important one is reading consistency. We encourage the children to read every day in order to promote their reading habits. The second index is the number of reading hours they spend in each month. And the last one is that the children also have to answer the questions at the end of each book and submit their answers on the app to earn more cash. The application system will also give the bonus score if the children improve their reading from the previous month. And they can earn cash up to around $26 per month, which is equivalent to 10% of their parents' average income. This is how the teacher dashboard in the monitoring system looks like. They can see the reading progress of each student and the amount of the incentives. Teachers can check the reading time of each student every day. They can check the answers that the students submitted through the application after finishing each book and verify the answers in the system. This graph shows the trends of the students' reading time under the teacher. You can see that the graph mostly is going up. Students from our pilot project could read up to 42 hours and more than 100 books per month, which is quite amazing. About half of the students have improved their literacy and reading skills in both Thai and Myanmar languages through the project, which will allow them to continue their education in Thailand or Myanmar. But we also found some challenges, such as the older students would have less time to read at home because they had to help their parents, which we try to adjust the reading criteria to be more flexible for them. The teachers are the most important persons to make this project become successful. We need to promote trust and strong bonds between teachers and students in order to make sure that the reading habits of the students can be created with joy in reading. And the parents were often very busy working and they didn't have much time to read with their children. But some parents could do it, and they found that they also improved their reading skills together with their kids. And this year, with the support of EEF, another 4 provinces in Thailand will be implementing the Learning Coin model. Another 500 out of school children in Mae Hong Son, Amnat Charoen, Nakhon Nayok, and Yala provinces will start reading, return to school, and receive the incentives to support their parents. UNESCO will be working with EEF through cooperation, the Ministry of Education Thailand, and the local education stakeholders to implement the project. We have recently provided the tablets and conducted the teacher training on how to use the LearnBig application within this month. So we hope that through this project, the marginalized children will have increased literacy and reading skills and remain in schools. Their needs to support the parents will be fulfilled. With the use of ICT in providing innovative finance, we still have a lot of lessons to be learned and to be improved. And we hope that this learning coin model can be considered as one approach to help our school children to stay in school. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to meet all of you during the question and answer session.
Thank you, Ms. Sovereign from UNESCO Bangkok for an interesting project on Learning Coin. And that was the end of our session on innovative financing for education. And I would like to thank you very much, our 3 distinguished speakers, for sharing their fascinating experience and the innovative models to financing education. And we would like to thank you also all the online participation. And if you have any question, you can leave it in Q&A chat box on the conference website. Thank you.